Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello, piano teachers. Thank you so much for being here. It means so much to me that you are listening to the podcast. If you listen every week, thank you for coming back. And if you're a new listener, welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm talking with Celeste Watson about piano technique and how to avoid injuries, and also what to do if you or your student does experience a piano-related injury. Here's a little bit about Celeste. Celeste Watson has a passion for helping others enjoy music by playing the piano with exciting musicality and scientifically informed technique. After experiencing several playing-related injuries and an intensive period of retraining and rehabilitation, Celeste returned to an active schedule of playing, teaching, and speaking. Playing the piano continues to challenge and grow her both as an artist and as a human being, and she works to help each of her students experience that same joy and growth. Here's my interview with Celeste. Hi, Celeste. Welcome to the show. I am so excited to talk with you today. Could you start out by introducing yourself and tell us a little about your studio?
Hi, Rachel. It's so great to chat with you. Thank you so much for having me on today. So I'm a pianist and teacher in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I have a couple of different parts of the studio. I work with the Lister Sync Institute and work with musicians who have a playing-related injury or a non-playing-related injury that's affecting their keyboard playing. So I do that. I also operate a conservatory model studio here in Winston-Salem. I teach pre-collegiate students. They come during the week for their private lessons, and then they come on Fridays for group sight singing, musicianship, and choir on Friday afternoons. And I have a wonderful group of faculty that teach with me on Fridays. Could not do it without them. So I have the studio going on. And then I also do some early childhood, really love sitting on the floor, making music with parents and babies. It's just a blast. So those are kind of the things I have going on in my studio in Winston-Salem.
Wow, so you do a wide range of ages, don't you?
I do sort of like everything from the babies up through the adult professionals. And I love working with the whole span of the musician. I find it very grounding because I was once very young. Someday I will be, hopefully, very old. And to just work with the whole span of that is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, I agree. If you love it, do both extremes. I do both extremes too, and I love it. I know our listeners can't see, but you have a really beautiful studio behind you with multiple pianos. Do you do group classes, or is it just the Friday classes that you do in groups?
So at this point, I only do private lessons. I don't have any group piano going on, although I am considering starting a group class for the first year or two of early beginners. Mm-hmm. But that's more for finance reasons, for families who have multiple siblings. I'm like, I would like to make that more affordable. But I do have a piano lab. We use it on Fridays in our musicianship classes for sight reading, transposition, composition, improv. And then the thing it gets used for the most is the younger siblings asking, and the older siblings asking during their siblings' lesson if they can just play on the piano. And I love that.
So
I
they
love
put on
saying
headphones
yes.
and practice?
Yes.
Oh, that's perfect.
Well, I don't know that they practice. I think they mostly just, they play, they make up stuff. I love that they just say, can I go play the pianos? And they have this independence and this desire to do it. Because when I started teaching, my students never said stuff like that. They would never just spontaneously say, can I play the piano? And now they do. And so I'm taking this as progress in a good direction.
Yes, that's awesome. And it's true. If there's nothing else there for them to do, they'll go and play the piano, right? I love it.
Yeah.
And maybe even if there were other things, they would choose the piano, hopefully. I would love for you to take us back and tell us what your lessons were like growing up.
Oh, I had phenomenal piano teachers growing up. I loved them so much. I started out with my mom. I still remember, I think I had just turned 6. It was the beginning of the school year. And I remember my mom coming home. We're from central Kansas. So she came home from Hutchinson, where the big music store was. And she had these orange books, and she sat down at the piano and she looked through them. And then she said, "Come, Celeste, you're going to learn to play the piano." And my mom is a teacher. She was a teacher for 15 years before she had me, of third graders and fourth graders. And so she understood how to implement learning and teaching in a very structured way. And every single morning, she sat with me and gave me a 30-minute piano lesson. And then she would have time scheduled in my day at 2 other times of the day where she would send me to the piano and she would just say, "Do whatever we did this morning." And then she did that every day of my life.
Wow.
Including high school. She sat with me. Even as I was with other teachers, she sat with me for 30 minutes every morning, Monday through Friday, and Saturdays, actually, and did that. So I would not be a pianist today if it was not for my mom doing that.
Yeah, because as a mom, and I've talked to a lot of other moms who struggle to teach their own kids. So that's really special that she was able to figure that out. Now, I will tell listeners that you and I both grew up in Central Kansas. Actually, we kind of we knew of each other at least. And then in recent years, we've kind of crossed paths through the music world. But yeah, we have some connections from the olden days, I guess, back in Kansas.
I remember when you were doing your bachelor's and grad program, I was like, ooh, there's a pianist who went to college for piano. Maybe I could go to college for piano too, because there are other people who do this. I think you were maybe one of the only people I knew of who did that and said, "I'm going to vocationally make a career of music." Because I remember telling my family, "I want to be a musician. I want to be a pianist." And they were really nice. But I think, like all parents, they were worried of what are you actually going to do to feed yourself? But there were enough people, including you, that I was like, "Oh, they went to college and they are somehow making it in the real world. So we will do this, and it will work somehow."
And here we are. I'm so happy to hear that.
Both of us making it in the real world.
As professional musicians.
Yes, doing what we wanted to do, or some version of it. I'm not doing exactly what I thought I would be doing, but it's actually better than I thought it would be, right? So, but yeah, my mom was my first teacher, and then probably around third or fourth grade, she wanted to pass me off to another teacher. So we found a wonderful teacher they found in Inman. Her name was Donna Reimer. She was fantastic. She was strict, but she was kind. I remember her saying, "You need to be a bear about rhythm." And I remember her being a very kind bear about rhythm and note accuracy. And she was just a very consistent teacher who she wasn't big on sort of useless praise, which I appreciated, right? She wasn't unkind and she wasn't mean, and she gave praise when it was truly earned. But she wasn't just handing out compliments all the time, but she was kind and she was consistent. That was amazing. And then when I was in high school, I moved on to some other teachers, Sylvia Wilcott, and then did some work with Dan Masterson. So appreciative of their work. And it was actually through Dan Masterson that I heard about Barbara Listersink and eventually found a solution to my injury. And so I'm just so thankful for all of the teachers who invested in me in elementary and high school and set up such a solid foundation, because I wouldn't be who I am today without them.
Would you be open to sharing a little about your injury and how that impacted what you're doing today?
So I was I think I was a 7th grader. And I got a critique sheet back from a fantastic adjudicator. I have buckets and buckets of respect for him. And he accurately diagnosed something in my playing. He said, you have a bangy sound. Your tone is quite harsh. And I was like, how do I fix this? I don't know how to fix the tone of my playing. And it was completely true. It was pretty bangy. And I was like, well, maybe if instead of hitting the piano with my forearms, essentially, maybe if I push from my shoulders, maybe this will be better. And so I was like, it will somehow change my tone. Well, it wasn't a good solution long term, as you can imagine. A certain amount of pushing from your shoulders didn't solve anything. But really and truly, I didn't realize that I had a genetic condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is hypermobility, sometimes called double jointedness. I'm not terribly double jointed in my fingers, but I'm quite double jointed and hypermobile in my spine my neck, my hips, and my elbows and my shoulders. And so, yeah, so the hypermobile population is already more injury prone because their connective tissue is not stabilizing the joints in the way that it's supposed to. So the joints move more than they should be, which means all the muscles around the joint are trying to contract to stabilize the joint, which means you're moving in a state of constant muscular contraction. And it's actually quite hard to release that unnecessary static contraction because the body is using that to stabilize the joints all the time. So I had that going on and didn't realize it. And then the technical issues that I was developing would have been problematic for any pianist. But for me as a hypermobile pianist, I think I experienced the results of those things in a more dramatic way than a person who was not hypermobile. So by the time I was a sophomore, or probably a junior in high school, by the time I was a junior in high school, I was in massive amounts of pain when I was playing. I got to the place where I couldn't wear anything around my neck. I couldn't wear any sort of like a necklace. I couldn't wear a blazer, anything structured that would inhibit the movement of my shoulders. Couldn't wear a bra. I was just in incredible amounts of pain. And anything that required me to sort of look down was very painful. So reading a book, washing dishes, typing at the computer. Obviously, playing the piano was the first place I noticed it, and it was the most extreme place I noticed it, but it wasn't the only place I noticed it. And my parents were worried, my teachers were worried, I was worried. I went to medical providers, PTs, went to see my general practice physician, and everybody was really kind and really sympathetic. And they said, "Oh, you have excess muscle tension. You need to release the unnecessary muscle tension and you need to strengthen the muscles that are weak," which is actually really, really, really good advice. That actually was what needed to happen. But I couldn't figure out how to do that. And for somebody who has hypermobility, a lot of the traditional ways in which we strengthen muscles are not efficacious. And also, how do you just stop using chronic muscular contraction that your body is just habituated to using? I mean, at this point, my entire life since I was 6, I'm playing the piano for an hour and a half every day, 6 days a week, and I'm 17 by now. I mean, like, I don't even want to calculate how many hours that is of a certain kind of practicing of a certain kind of neuromuscular pattern. So, long story short, I worked outside of the music industry. I realized I couldn't take a performance degree because I wouldn't be able to practice. It was actually psychologically and emotionally, it was a really hard season, that end of high school season. I had really wanted to be doing competitions. I really wanted to be playing a senior recital. And instead, I was sort of like, here's this upper elementary Christmas duet. And that was just about it. And so it was psychologically hard. I didn't really have the language at that age to describe what was going on in my emotions. I didn't have the language to describe that. And the people around me would have wanted to have been supportive of that, but I didn't know how to express it to people around me. So I went off to college. I did other things. I worked outside of the music industry for about 10 years. I worked in college and graduate school administration. It was a strange season of life because I really wanted to be a musician and I couldn't. And I didn't want to be teaching because I thought if I start teaching, then I'm going to pass on to my students whatever bad technical habits have gotten me into trouble. And I just remember when I was in grad school, one of them, the head of the music department, came to me and recruited me to sing in an a cappella choral group. And he told me, he said, "You don't choose music, music chooses you, and music has chosen you." And I just remember thinking, what does this mean? Like, how can he know that? I obviously can't play. And looking back on that, it's such an encouraging thing now to look and say, oh, somebody outside of my situation saw something and gave me that encouragement. And at the time, it made no sense. So all of that, fast forward, I eventually moved to North Carolina, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to retrain with Dr. Barbara Lister-Sink. And through her work, through the work of some really fantastic medical providers and myofascial release specialists and physical therapists, as well as through the work of quite a number of other pianists who had gone through similar things and could give me advice, I became a part of a community of other people who had experienced injury and had recovered from injury or were in the process of recovering. And it took me quite a long time. It took me probably 5 years. I don't think it takes everyone the same amount of time, but it took me a long time. My body had been through a lot, and it took my body and my nervous system a really, really long time to completely reset and heal from that. But I was eventually able to retrain, and I love being able to play now. And I feel like the retraining, because so much of that has to do with understanding how your body works, understanding how your nervous system works, working with your nervous system, working with your body. I feel so much more connected to my body and connected to my musicianship and my artistry now. I always felt before that musicianship and artistry were sort of these fairies that someday they visited you, and then some days they didn't. And if the gods did not sprinkle pixie dust upon you that day, the artistry just wasn't there. And some days it was there, and some days it wasn't. And the retraining taught me that not only is there a way that my body can function optimally physically, but actually musicianship itself and artistry can be taught, because it's an acquired skill that comes through listening deeply and understanding what you're doing, and really and truly listening to your sound, listening to the harmonic progressions, and using those as guideposts for your artistry. And that doesn't mean that 3 people playing the same piece are going to sound the same, but it gave me really concrete ways to be musical. And I no longer have this feeling that some days I can turn a beautiful phrase and some days I can't, right? That doesn't mean I'm the most amazing pianist anybody's ever heard, but it does mean that I feel so much more consistent and reliable. And what I can do consistently. And I'm really proud of that. And that is due largely to the retraining work. It's also due largely to the continuing education that I've done in music education philosophies. That has really been a big part of, in some ways, my healing journey. Going back to the very fundamental basics of what is music? How do we make music? What does it mean to share music with one another? So that's very long and rambly.
No, thank you for sharing that story and being so open and honest. So are you able to play pain-free for the most part now?
Yeah, I am. And there are some exceptions if I'm going through a pain cycle with EDS. So EDS, you do have your chronic pain, but I can tell the difference between like a playing related pain and, oh, this is just an EDS cycle. And I consistently no longer have playing related pain. Every once in a while, if I get super excited and practice too much, I'm like, oh, I felt a twinge there, but I know exactly what to do. I know exactly how not to be afraid of it, right? For me, a big part of like pain is worse when you're afraid of the pain. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what it was. I know how not to do it again. And I have a much healthier feedback loop for how to understand what is healthy and how to have a healthy practice.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing all of that. I have to tell you, when I was listening to you, as a piano teacher, and I think probably most piano teachers feel this way, we haven't been through something like that. And so I feel completely ill-equipped to help a student through anything like that. I haven't had to help a student through something like that, but I think most of us don't have the tools to do that. And even with technique, sometimes I feel at a loss. Like I'm teaching the way I've been taught, and I had incredible teachers who taught amazing technique, but still sometimes, my students have a different hand shape, a different hand size, a different body, some of them are tiny, some of them aren't. And like being able to adapt to all those different students and teach really good technique, it can be hard. When I only know my body and I know what technique works for me, but I'm not in their bodies and I don't know. So hopefully we can get into a little of that today. And maybe that's where we should start. What are some of the important elements of technique that we, as just an average teacher, can focus on to prevent any kind of injury? Now, I know yours was a little different because it was your body structure and all of that. But as far as more general playing related injuries, what can we do to avoid that?
Yeah. Let's think about the child who is a student in our studio, maybe. And then we can maybe think about the adult, because you're right, those are two very different scenarios. An adult who's already experiencing playing related pain versus a child. And in some ways, I mean, I don't want to say that one is harder than the other, but in some ways, it's almost more complicated with kids, right? Because there's such a size mismatch between their body and the instrument. But it's equally hard in both, but they're both unique.
Yeah. So let's talk about the kids and the prevention sort of first.
My friend Bethany Cawthorn, she has a phrase that I love to use, and she says the environment is the technique for little kids. So setting up the environment so that the child in the environment will have good alignment. So this might be, if you think of like a 5-year-old who might start piano lessons, sitting on a bench with their hand touching the keyboard, their forearm's probably not going to be in the right alignment unless you have a super adjustable bench. And then if you adjust it, then you're going to have to put lots of books under their feet. And then if they're sitting, they don't really have an understanding of how to sit well at the keyboard, and it's not going to be habitually sitting well. So to sit on the bench just causes alignment issues for a 5-year-old. So a simple swap, like have the 5-year-old stand in front of the keyboard so that their arm can be at a comfortable 90-degree angle. The upper arm can be gently hanging by the side, and the forearm, the top of the forearm can be level with the floor. That sets the child up to be habitually moving in a place of good alignment where they can move well from the elbows. If the child's very young, that may still be too short, right? And we may need to put something in front of the piano that they can walk side to side on so that they can be at the right height. But what can I do to change the environment so that the child's natural way of being at the instrument is habitually better? If I have exercise mats in front of the piano and the child can walk freely back and forth, and they're standing and they're playing, standing in front of the keyboard, we know that their arm is just going to be in a better alignment habitually. And those motor patterns that can get someone like me into trouble, those are established when the child is small. So doing those kinds of things, an adjustable bench when the child is of an age to be able to sit well consistently, which is older than I often realize, sitting on a bench that's adjustable, right? Having a mirror by the piano and teaching the child in lessons. Do you see your upper arm is hanging gently by your side, and your forearm, here's your forearm. Do you see it in the mirror? Is the top of your forearm parallel with the floor? This is the position of greatest mechanical advantage. And teaching the child that when you go home, you're going to use your mirror to adjust your bench height, and just making that part of the habit pattern of the studio. You come in, you adjust the bench from the previous student, things like that. I think that's a really helpful thing. So this all kind of falls under the alignment. I hate the word posture, because posture, often we have this connotation of holding yourself uncomfortably in what we imagine is good posture. Good alignment is comfortable, it's dynamic, it allows for good movement in a lot of directions. Yeah, it should not be uncomfortable in any situations except very rare situations. But it should be comfortable, it should be well balanced, it should be just the way that the child can move well. So they're not having to adapt their body to the instrument, but we are adapting the instrument to their body. The other thing that I think often is super important in this is helping the child, well, two things, technically with the child's body at the piano, helping the child understand that movement at the keyboard is initiated from the elbow, not the shoulder. So the small child doesn't really distinguish between movement from the elbow and movement from the shoulder. They just sort of move the whole thing. And so one of the things that we as piano teachers can work towards is helping the child move from the elbow. And we can tell that just by looking at the child from the side. Do I see movement starting at the shoulder? Now, there's going to be movement that happens at the shoulder, but is it starting there? Are they moving their whole arm from the shoulder? Or are they understanding gradually over time that this initiates from the elbow? And then the shoulder can be involved as it needs to be, but fundamentally it's a coordination up and down from the elbow. And then with that, this idea of the neutral shape of the hand and arm. And how do we move that neutral shape side to side on the piano?
Can we talk about that? Because I have some students who are on the struggle bus right now with their neutral hand shape. And I would love to know all of your best tips if you have ways that you talk about it, illustrations, gimmicks, anything, give it all.
So for some students, as you know, we all have in our studios, those students who get the neutral hand shape quickly and those who don't.
I have one girl, I have to tell you, I have this girl just came in with the most beautiful posture and hand shape. And I never like say a word about it because it's so perfect. I'm like scared I'm going to ruin it. But she just sits down, and maybe it's because she does a lot of dance too. Like she just sits up and she just like, the listeners can't see me, but she just puts her hands on the piano and just looks so like a little princess, a piano princess. And I'm like, thank you. We don't have to talk about that. And then I have the other ones who are the other extreme, which we'll talk about now. So go for it.
I think there is, though, what you're saying, something about that connection to dance. And also the students who are in martial arts, they sort of have this trained knowledge of how to use their core and how to sit. And I think you're right that those disciplines do train in that way. So we spend a lot of time away from the piano looking and observing our hand shape. So we'll try to spend, even with the 5-year-olds, just a minute away from the piano, and we'll sit and we'll just sort of have our hands palms up on our laps. And I touch their fingers. I tell them to let their fingers be soft, because the arch is not something you form through muscular effort. It's something that is already in the hand by reason of the bony structure. And so I touch their fingers, I check that their fingers are soft. And usually for the young beginner, their fingers are not soft and malleable. They're quite stiff and they move them in a jerky way. And so most weeks we're spending just 1 or 1.5 or 2 minutes on the floor with their hands palm up, and I'm touching their fingers, inviting their fingers to be soft and gentle. And we might even make up a little story. My friend Lucia Dank, she would describe this is the nest, right? And the mother bird has come and she's laid eggs in that. And what happens if you squeeze your hands together? Or what happens if there's no nest shape in your hands, right? And then we just observe that nest. Maybe we'll even move that shape around in the air to give them practice of what does it feel like to move with this shape around in the air. We might take that shape, and we talk about turning it upside down so that the fingertips are now touching my lap. And then I might move it around on my lap. Can I feel that shape that is in my hand? Can I feel that as I'm moving it around and touching different places on my lap or different parts of my body? And then that's kind of a fun little game. Like, can you touch with this hand shape on top of your head or your ear? Always just looking for, are they moving that hand shape? And of course they do this imperfectly, but it's all raising awareness that I often am touching their hands and helping them to feel the neutrality of that and the fingers very gentle. And we do that every week for a long time until they get more and more and more comfortable with that. When we come to the piano, I think every teacher does this a little bit differently, right? The thing that has worked the best for me is to begin work technically with the young child, on the center finger. So the center finger is the longest finger. It's in the middle of the hand, and they actually can play quite a lot with the center finger. And when they play with the center finger, initially, their motions seem much more jerky, right? Because it's uncovering the fact that they actually don't know how to move the neutral arm around on the keyboard. They're much more comfortable reaching and poking with the fingers. The thing that they don't know how to do is move the whole arm sideways or in and out onto a black and white key. And so we spend a lot of time playing little fun pieces that involve them using their 2 center fingers to move all over the keyboard and learning to let the arm move the hand all over. And then I gradually do involve the second finger and the third finger and eventually the thumb. And so they begin to use all of their fingers, but I'm constantly going back to moving that center finger and that whole arm around the keyboard. And they use their other fingers in piano as well, but we are consistently doing center finger work for at least the first 3 years of piano. Yes. And that doesn't mean they are not also using their other fingers sometimes, but it is for the first 3 years, they're pretty consistently. Now they're still playing fun rep all over the keyboard, right? Because the goal is to get the arms to move all over. So they're playing all over the keyboard. And I'm specifically picking rep that requires them to use the whole keyboard because we want their arms to be trained in this span of horizontal movement. And they get very, very, very good at it. And then that really transfers to the other fingers. Finger 2, finger 3, finger 5, finger 1. They get quite good at using those in conjunction with the center finger. And then eventually, I think the other thing is waiting to introduce 5-finger skills like pentascales and 5-finger pieces until they really do have a level of fluency. They don't need to have perfection with that, but a level of fluency where you can really see that. How do they get from C to G? Do they get to C from C to G by reaching with the thumb and pinky? Or do they get there by putting their hand behind the C and then putting their hand behind the G? When I see that, then I'm like, oh yeah, this is now when we're ready for pentascale work. And that doesn't mean that they're not using all 5 fingers before then, but that's the point at which I'm then begin to consistently assign 5-finger pieces because I'm like, oh, they have the ability to move the hand sideways, meaning move the whole arm sideways.
Okay. So I know teachers are going to want to know the answer to this question. Is there a method book that you like to start kids in that you feel coincides well with this technique that you're talking about?
And I think you can do it with a wide variety of method books. I do have some that I use, but I'm not exclusionary about any of them. So I have loved using some of Paula Dreyer's little gems. There is a primer, a creative primer, a level 1 and a level 2. I find those to be fabulous for technique work because they do have a ton of pieces that you can play just with fingers 2 and 3. And they have a lot of pieces that you can play just with your center finger. And then as they move through, they also have pieces that use a lot of 5-1 sort of broken fifths pieces, which are also so great for teaching this kind of coordination. I want to say that Paula Dreyer has maybe had some Taubman training, and so she writes in a way that's very arm friendly. My own personal training is not Taubman training. I have Lister Sync training, but as far as like what you're actually working with kids, there can be a lot of crossover between those two when you're working at the child pedagogy level, even though there's some differences in those two methods when you're working with adults who are injured. When you're working with kids, there can be a lot of crossover. So that's really helpful. I have found the keyboard games from Marilyn Lowe to be very, very helpful. For my super littles, they spend a good amount of time in that. And then obviously, I mean, those are what I tend to use. And then just like open up the method books and pick and choose. So I have pieces that I pick and choose from a variety of method books. Some of them are rote method books, some of them are reading method books, but I just love to find repertoire that would be hand and arm friendly for little kids. But the backbone of the curriculum that I use is those Paula Dreyer books and the keyboard games books.
Okay. Thank you for sharing those. I want to ask for those of us who have maybe transfer students. I know I inherited a boy who plays with so much tension, and like we work on it in the lesson, but then I know he just goes home and practices the old way. Do you have any advice for a little bit of, I guess, retraining for the young ones and then how to get them to transfer that to at home practice?
Rachel, I think this is the hardest thing for me. This is where I love to work with transfers because they're a challenge, but then they're a challenge. I mean, I think it's harder to work with a transfer student than any of the adults who are having technical challenges and chronic pain. I think that the transfer students are harder.
Yeah, because at least they can understand what's going on and understand that they need to do it a certain way at home, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be completely honest. I have very mixed success with teenage transfer students. The younger the transfer, the easier it is. So I'm working with some 8, 9, and 10-year-old transfers under the age of 10. Those tend to go pretty well because I have a lot of repertoire that sounds good that they can play that requires just a minimum number of fingers. And we can quite quickly go through that sequence of how they can consistently be playing with a neutral arm arch and moving the forearm around horizontally. They can learn that pretty quickly, and I can give them enough satisfying rep to keep them happy while they learn those skills. But for the teenagers, I struggle a lot. And I would say I love to work with teenage transfer students, but I would say only about half of them successfully move into a super great technical model that I'm happy with. And I think the reason is because in order to change technique, you have to change your movement. And it requires a certain level of calmness and a certain level of desiring to objectively observe your movements and improve them. And I think for a lot of teenagers, certainly me when I was 11, 12, I did not want to do that. I just wanted to play big and fast and loud. And that's okay. Like, I still love to play big and fast and loud. And they are just in that space. I have had some teenagers who come to me and they really do want to change their technique. And without fail, if the student wants to change it, we can change it. And everything is great. They're happy. They play musically. I give them rep that's appropriate. It works great. But if the student doesn't want to change it, then I don't like to work too much on that, because I find at the teenage level, for me personally, in my experience, they'll start hating piano if I'm forcing them to play in a certain way that they don't want to play in, because that way of playing doesn't feel good if you're not proprioceptively aware of your body and kinesthetically aware. And for somebody who's 12 and 13, that can be really uncomfortable, right? Like, to sit quietly and observe your breathing. I mean, that's such a foreign skill. Now, to those young kids who have a family structure that is supportive of doing that, it does work really well. And I can give them those skills, but the family has to be willing to take that amount of time, and the student has to be okay with it. And a lot of students are, and a lot of families do want that. But there are some families who they're looking for different kinds of results, and there are students who are looking for different kinds of results. And I just want to be respectful of that. And I don't want to force. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I haven't cracked the code of how to teach technique to a student who doesn't want to change their technique.
Yeah, like how to trick them into it.
Yes, I think there are probably teachers who can do that. And I just want to apprentice myself to them and figure out how to do that.
I understand.
I want to do that because I love working with transfer students and I just want to change all of their technique. And I don't know how to do that.
Okay, well, thank you for your honesty. Okay, I want to transition and talk about adults, perhaps maybe adults who have a playing related injury or poor technique that they want to change. What do you find works well with your adult students?
There are several, I think, foundational principles for a healthy, well-coordinated injury preventative technique. One of them we've already talked about is good alignment, because that's the easiest one to teach to kids. For adults, there's one that I think is even more fundamental, and that's kinesthetic awareness or proprioception. Kinesthetic awareness or proprioception is your ability to sense where your body is in space and your ability to feel what the muscular state of a given part of your body feels like at any given time. In this moment, I'm sitting on the floor and I can feel that I have more of my weight on my right sitting bone and thigh than on my left. And I can feel that consciously. We know that when we have increased proprioception, when we can sense the muscular state of our body and our arm, and where we can feel where that is in space, that we intuitively use it in a more well-coordinated manner. People who have lower levels of proprioception, their motions I was just reading a study for a presentation I was giving on hypermobility at the MTNA conference last year, and we ran across a study that surveyed people who were actually hypermobile, and their motions were just as accurate, but they were more jerky and they were more scattered. It was a proprioception study, right? Your ability to feel where your body is in space actually increases the quality of your movement. It also gives you the ability to think about what kind of a movement do I want to have? Do I want to be using this muscle group or do I want to be using this muscle group? So for an adult who's dealing with a playing related injury, certainly for myself, a really fundamental part of that was not only the technique of which muscle groups do I want to be using and not want to be using, but how can I actually tell in my body if I am using those muscle groups? People could have told me all day long, you're pushing from your shoulders. And by the time I was 17, that was so habitual, I couldn't find another way to depress keys. I couldn't have found that in my body because I didn't have that level of proprioception.
Yeah. Well, and playing the piano is so much about muscle memory that our muscles will remember the wrong the wrong movement, right?
And there's two ways to overcome that, right? So when you want to change the habitual muscle pattern, you can slow the muscular movement down. That will give you an opportunity to change how you're using it. And you can also change how your nervous system is. The calmer your nervous system is, the more likely you are to move in a well coordinated way. So, some sort of proprioceptive art or skill like Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, myofascial release, these kinds of things that target muscular use and involve calming the nervous system at some level. Now, something like Alexander technique is not going to be talking on the front end about the nervous system. But the effect, if you sit quietly and observe your breathing, is going to be that the nervous system will be calmed. You're going to put yourself into a state of increased proprioception. If I sit quietly and observe my breathing, I'm going to feel more about what's happening in my arm than when I don't. It's fascinating. The Lister Sync Institute does a summer intensive, a 2-week. Is it 2-week or a week? It's a week every summer, I think. And one of the first exercises we do with all the students who come in is we all lie on a yoga mat and we do essentially a progressive relaxation exercise where we tighten various muscle groups throughout the body and release them. And the first time I did that, I couldn't release throughout my body. Like I could tighten and I could release a little bit. But over the years, as I've done more Alexander technique, as I've done more kinesthetic awareness work, I'm so much more aware of the muscle state in my body. And I can make choices about I want to use this muscle group and not this muscle group because I have a much higher resting level of awareness. It's like people who work out aerobically have a lower resting heart rate. Is that how it goes? If they do aerobic work, they have a lower resting heart rate. And it's like that with kinesthetic awareness. If you are consistently engaged in a practice that develops your kinesthetic awareness, you're going to have more of it throughout your life. Now, it's not a fast thing. It's not like a magic bullet. It's not going to be something that fixes you in one summer, but it provides the foundation by which you can know, am I using a muscle group that I don't want to use? Am I using the muscle group that I do want to use? So then layered on top of proprioception kinesthetic awareness is good alignment, and then specific application of what's the most efficient way muscularly to move for your instrument. So for the piano, what's the most efficient way to depress a key? If I want a loud sound, how do I need to be muscularly efficient in my production of that? And for me, I needed people to come alongside of me and help me to have that experience of that in my body because I didn't have choice about how to do that. Like I was in my own habit patterns and I needed people outside of me to come and help me to have greater kinesthetic awareness, greater understanding of this is good alignment, and greater understanding of these are the muscle groups that you need to be using to do XYZ at the piano. And that's kind of where the Lister Sync method came in. It definitely works in those last two areas, but it incorporates the kinesthetic awareness. But any system of technique that you use, it's going to be greatly aided if you add in some sort of kinesthetic awareness practice, right? If you're doing Taubman is going to be way more efficacious if you're doing Alexander technique regularly, if you're doing some sort of a proprioceptive art form. It's going to increase the efficaciousness of anything that you're doing.
Well, Celeste, I feel like this is such a big topic. We could talk for days. So I think that we've just kind of scratched the surface. If teachers want to go a little bit deeper with this, where would you recommend they start? Are there some resources or anything you can give us? I mean, you mentioned a whole bunch of things already, but like specific places they might go to go a little deeper?
You're welcome to reach out to me at watson-music.com. And you're welcome to reach out to me through that. I'm happy to chat and give recommendations of resources that might be custom tailored for you. There's a phenomenal book called What Every Pianist Needs to Know About the Body by Thomas Mark. That's fantastic. go through the book, and when he has little call out sections, actually do the proprioceptive and kinesthetic work that he recommends. It doesn't do really a lot of good to read about kinesthetic work and alignment. You have to really be open to being curious about, how does my body do this? What does it feel like? Go find an Alexander Technique teacher. They're very unique one to another. So if you, for some reason, don't like the Alexander Technique teacher that you work with, go find another one, because they can be quite unique one to another. Do some proprioceptive work. If you're interested in learning more about the Lister Sync method, feel free to contact me. You can also go to their website, the Lister Sync Institute. There are also increasingly resources for the person who is hypermobile, if that's something that you have experienced. There are so many resources online that can give more information about that. Getting a good diagnosis in that can be very complicated. So if that's something that you have concerns about for yourself, maybe pursue learning about that through the resources available online and pursue getting a diagnosis. It can be very helpful. And yeah, just like having conversations with people is a great thing. There is a huge stigma about talking about injury, because it's very true. Like if we open up and talk about our injury, there can sometimes be consequences, right? That's just the effect of that, right? Like people are less likely to ask me back to gig, right? If I have an injury. The other side of that is we're not going to help one another, and we're not going to get to the bottom of this, and we're not going to help prevent this from happening to ourselves and others if we're not open about talking about this. And so just continuing to talk about it with each other, talk about it in our professional meetups, and just encouraging a lot of conversation about this and finding people who have information that is biomechanically sound, listening to that and applying it. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, Celeste. I have so much to think about now. And it sounds like you've given us some resources to look at. And I learned a lot today. I really, really appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge with us here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was so great to talk with you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Celeste, for opening up and sharing about your injury and how you have worked through that. I trust that it will help educate a lot of people about technique and give hope to pianists that retraining is possible after an injury. That's the end of the show for this week. I'm Rachel Ehring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I will speak with you again next week.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.